anytime we look at making improvements, I think we need to understand the business opportunity or the business problem that we're trying to solve. I think a lot of times we focus on the solution and we focus on the technology, and frankly, it's not really about that. It's about what it is that you're trying to solve for.
Welcome back to another installment of the Next Gen Case Study series. On this episode today, we have Simon Bonk, who is the Chief Research Officer and Director of New Business Development at Telio Management Canada. With a career-spanning roles such as CIO at the Correctional Service of Canada, Simon brings extensive experience in advancing technology within the corrections sector. At Telio, he focuses on strategic market development and fostering relationships with key stakeholders to promote thought leadership and modernize correctional facilities globally, which is why we're excited to have him on the program. Simon, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, and appreciate the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you this afternoon.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get into this conversation. We've had some trouble with technology to get here, so this is definitely a labor of love. To kick things off, Simon, I'd love to get a quick kind of Coles Notes version of your history. You know, where you came from, how you ended up in the role that you're in now with Telio.
Yeah, it's kind of it wasn't certainly planned out to be where I am. When I started my career in the Canadian public service in the federal government, I started in the Canadian version of the IRS, held a whole bunch of different jobs, spanning probably close to 15 years. I then moved to Canada Border Services Agency, which is loosely aligned to your Homeland Security Border Enforcement Office in the United States. And again, 2 or 3 different roles. And when I concluded my time there, I was in an advisory capacity to the CIO there. And the job at corrections came up, the CIO job. I thought, we'll give it a whirl, see what happens. I'm not a technologist by background or education, and I certainly had no experience in corrections, but I thought it was, it was an interesting opportunity. So I applied, and lo and behold, I got the job. Did that for about 6 years and was able to cultivate a nice network from around the world. And as I was nearing the end of my career and looking for how I would continue to extend it in the private sector, I was connected with Telio. Telio is a digital services telecommunication service provider based out of Hamburg, Germany, and we're present in over 26 countries. And I thought, this will be an interesting opportunity. So we sat down and had some extended conversations, and I landed with them. I was the first North American employee, and I've been with them now for 2.5 years.
That's quite the journey to get here. Some happy, what do I call this? Coincidences and situations where it wasn't necessarily what we were aiming at, but here we are anyhow, and making the best of the situation. I'm curious to learn more about the work that Telio does. Kind of 2 big bird's eye view questions here. Who do they help, and what do they help them with?
Great question. And a lot of our contracts are obviously with correctional jurisdictions around the world. Telio is present in about 25, 26 different countries, spanning Europe, Africa, Australia, North America. And so a lot of all of our contracts are with correctional jurisdictions around the world. So obviously we're contributing to their outcomes, but our clients are really the incarcerated person, their family, their friends whom they want to maintain contact with or have contact with. We also provide digital service as well, video visits, education, entertainment. We also provide services internal to the prison system. But so I think our client base, it's mixed. But like I say, our contract is with the correctional jurisdiction, but our clients are also the incarcerated individual and their families. So, and what we do is to facilitate those relationships. It's well documented that when an incarcerated person has the ability to maintain those relationships, it strengthens their opportunity for rehabilitation. And of course, that's one of the prime motivation of correctional organizations around the world is those folks that come in, philosophically, we want them to, that we want to help them to be better people and return to society in a better place and be successful so that, frankly, they don't come back.
At the core of it all, the people who really benefit from the work that you do are the families, the friends, of the people that are incarcerated. But the way that you serve that group of people is through these various different contracts that you have with the correctional facilities. Is that kind of accurate?
Yeah, no, that you've got that pretty much bang on. And it's interesting because our services, as you described, those are the folks that consume our services. But I would actually say that, and this is an interesting conversation. It's a bit of a pet project of mine, actually. That corrections, we don't do a very good job of telling our story, our narrative, our what we're trying to accomplish. Because as you mentioned, our services are directly consumed by inmates and their families. But really, if we're doing our job well and we're facilitating the good correctional outcomes that each correctional jurisdiction want to achieve, the benefit is actually society. When you start to think about it, if we can better position the incarcerated person not to recidivate, then they're making a contribution economically to society. They're having an impact on their social network, their community, which in turn strengthens our community. So I would actually say that at the end of the day, the benefit of what we do and when we do it well is society writ large. We're in a better place by facilitating good correctional outcomes, which lead to better societal outcomes.
That's got to be a hard pitch. I mean, I don't mean to. I mean, like, I'm just thinking about it in terms of, okay, when I don't know, if I need to build a deck on my backyard, I will go and look at landscaping companies who provide a service like that, and I get the thing that I'm asking for, and there's a clear connection between me, the user of the deck, and the builder, and I there's a clear commerce exchange there. But what you have to sell has to be sold to somebody who's not going to necessarily use that thing, and so you have to create a different message to resonate with them so that they see the benefit of why helping these people, not them, is going to help them. And so can you talk to that a little bit? How have you shaped that in your work in terms of client acquisition?
It's a great question. And let me start by saying that most of our political masters, it doesn't matter what country you're in, don't usually get reelected on things like improve recidivism, right? Like they're not getting a whole bunch of votes by saying, you know what, we want to have the rate of recidivism become lower, and that's partly on corrections, frankly, because we don't do a very good job of telling our story, as I mentioned. And really, you have to, and there isn't a lot of research, and it's funny because I've been one of my roles is to what I've been trying to do is build relationship with academia so that we can better demonstrate with empirical evidence that, reduced recidivism actually improves GDP, or reduced recidivism helps to deal with racial equality issues, or in Canada, Indigenous issues as well. In most countries that have an Indigenous population, as an example, the rate of incarceration for those groups is much higher than their percentage in society. So there's a real over incarceration for certain groups. So in our role, or my role, part of what I'm trying to do is to drive a narrative that starts to better articulate those I'll call them correctional output, leading to higher level societal gains, which politicians will get reelected, and then they will support and they will invest in corrections. And a lot of times people I think that corrections is kind of the end of the justice continuum. I might actually argue it's the start. And that if we can start to think about that as a precursor to being successful, maybe we can start to change hearts and minds a little bit. But you're bang on. It's a tough sell. And we hear lots of different things about tough on crime and approaches like that, and keeping the incarceration rate or filling the prisons, frankly. And that's something else that you have to end up combating if you want to invest in prisons in terms of rehabilitation. If you're going to keep prisons full, then you have to build more prisons. But I'm not sure that's necessary. From my perspective, I'm not sure that's necessarily the approach that we should be thinking about. But it's really trying to change the narrative a little bit, and being able to demonstrate the value in a scientific way.
Right. Yeah. It's all a money play, really. Like when you dissect it, it's interesting that that's kind of what you pointed at. I heard a clip of Neil deGrasse Tyson talking recently about why we don't desalinate the ocean because it's an abundance of water, and he said it's too expensive and there's no money in it afterwards, and so nobody is willing to invest in it. And I think that that's a curious correlation to draw to the corrections industry, and I call it an industry because maybe not necessarily here in Canada, but in most parts of the world, it's a privatized business, and so there's a level of profitability, and there's the need for capital and investment, and then, well, how do we make this more efficient or more better? And so, like, really, it's about chasing the ROI on the whole operations, and I wonder if that has shaped some of the messaging or the work that you're doing.
Absolutely, and I think defining that ROI in terms that resonate with people, is critically important. And folks in every country has corrections, right? Every almost I can't think I've had the good fortune of being able to travel the world and talk about corrections and listen to others and learn about corrections. Again, I didn't start my career in corrections, which is an interesting little sidebar. Is that a lot of folks in corrections, they spent their entire career in corrections. They're incredibly knowledgeable about the business that they're in. Um, and I think sometimes, though, that works to their detriment, though, as well, because they know it so well, and they're able to articulate it in terms of that's their day-to-day life, and it has been for 20, 30 or plus years in many instances. And getting them to be able to think about articulating what they do and how they do it in a different way that will resonate with an audience, that going to make budget decisions and things of that nature is critically important. And I think when I joined Corrections Canada, one of the advantages that I had in the role is that I'd been in two or three different large departments and really got to understand how to work within the system, within the system of government, to position yourselves to secure investment, to be able to make change and drive change. And I think that was really helpful. I know within my own organization, it certainly helped be able to recast the narrative in a different way by understanding the audience, what resonates with that audience outside of the world of correction. And I remember one time going and talking to our Treasury Department about data and information management. Not the sexiest topic to be going in and saying, you need to give us a bunch of money to improve this. But I opened with the story of an individual, because you're probably familiar with Whitey Bulger, crime boss out of Boston. And he turned state evidence, and then I think he was in witness protection, and you can correct me if I got some of these details wrong. And then he ended up going on the run, going out of witness protection. They ended up capturing him, I think, when he was like in his 70s or 80s. I forget how old he was, but he ended up dying in prison. And the way that the story was conveyed to me was that he was in custody, and they transferred him to another institution. Well, there's lots of paper still in the correctional space today around the world. So his paper file allegedly didn't go with him, so that when he came into the new facility that he was going to be spending some time, they didn't know who he was, allegedly, and they didn't know his history and his background. He ended up going into general population, and he didn't make it through the night. He was brutally beaten, and he ended up dying in prison. And I told that story, and I said, part of that narrative is that the data, the information management, was on paper. if we had had a more sophisticated, and in Canada we still rely on paper to some degree, but because of that, we're not efficient, we're not effective, and we're prone to mistakes. And in the space of corrections, if something happens, people's lives are at stake. So that was how I opened the conversation around information management and the requirement to have some investment so that, frankly, we could get rid of paper. And when you start to reframe the conversation and put it in terms that folks can appreciate, because one, they weren't corrections experts, two, they weren't information management experts, but they get the life and death reality when you tell a story like that. And the consequences of that are, of course, there's lawsuits and a whole bunch of other scrutiny that you'll be under. But it's thinking about having that conversation and being able to tell it in a different way so that it resonates with your audience. And there's lots of opportunity in corrections for progress and growth and evolution. And I hope that what we're doing at Telio helps to try to drive that conversation, perhaps in a little bit different way that will enable correctional jurisdictions to get more investment to make some of these improvements.
Well, and on that note, can you kind of walk me through what the process is to like acquire a new client in your space? Like based on what we've talked about so far, how difficult it is to like create the messaging and framing and all that. So how do you actually make the approach and build that relationship and turn it into a client?
Yeah, so great question. It's interesting because in terms of global reach, Telio is probably at the forefront, if not, the leader in terms of working in different jurisdictions. Certainly, we have competitors that are much bigger than us from a revenue perspective. In part because, frankly, the United States is the biggest market in the world for prisoners and inmates and jails and what have you. So just the sheer numbers drive larger business. Having said that, there's that old saying, was it 6 degrees of separation, and we're all connected by like six, a maximum of six people. I would argue that Telio degrees of separation within the correctional space is either 0 or 1. If we don't know the people in the jurisdictions of who to talk to help them to advance their business, we probably are one phone call away from somebody within our network to be able to make that conversation. And we're always looking to expand. And in every country where we do open up business, we actually have a local footprint. So we're a global company, and we have 26, I'll call them subsidiaries, but 26 Telio presence in every country that we operate. But really, it's looking at the market, understanding the market, and there's it's a really varied. I don't know if maturity is the right level, but approach maybe the better way to put it in these different jurisdictions. In North America, for example, telephones, tablets, tablets have been present for over a decade, thoroughly embraced, entertainment, communication, education, there's a myriad of services. But in Europe, it's just starting to come into to prisons. The telecommunication is there. They really much advocate in-cell telephony and things of that nature. But then you go to other parts of the world and they don't even have telephone. So it's understanding, the philosophy of the countries, what's going to resonate with them. Are they looking to modernize? Are they looking to reform their approach? And because of our global network, we're able to assess that. Actually, I have a colleague right now who's working in Africa to open up a new market there. It's looking positive, and we're looking in other parts of the world as well. And it's frankly through our global network and connections and relationships.
Right. I imagine that would pose a bit of a challenge in terms of like just logistically keeping in touch with everybody, managing your conversations and notes and things like that. What in the way of tools and AI technologies and things like that, what in the way of that are you implementing to kind of improve, streamline, or mitigate some of those challenges in your process?
Yeah. So in terms of the client acquisition, I think it's probably a little bit more of a hands-on approach, and we'll leverage analytical tools to help us to better understand market potential and cultivate intelligence and things of that nature. I mean, I know I personally use ChatGPT a lot, um, and for a whole bunch of different reasons. When I was working in corrections in Canada, I had a fairly significant staff, and I always used to say it's easier to edit than to create. My role in Telio is much different. I don't have that same capacity in terms of people supporting me. So ChatGPT is starting to become my staff, and then again, it's easier to edit than to create. You can't take ChatGPT for gospel, but certainly it's a nice place to start when if I'm having to create content for presentations, or if I'm reaching out to different jurisdictions and being able to get a little bit of a additional insight into their reality. I have to obviously have to verify it and validate it. It's a I wouldn't call it decision, but it's certainly a support tool, right? And you got to be careful. You're not always getting the exact references. You better double check your references and things of that nature. But certainly for me on a day-to-day basis, I'm using things like ChatGPT to better situate our opportunities, or working with partners and things of that nature. So I personally use artificial intelligence quite regularly to augment my capacity, and it's frankly quite efficient. And I was writing a note to some folks the other day, and it's like I put in the parameters in GPT, and I got this 2-page email that I could send. I had to edit it and adjust it and tailor it, but that was a lot easier than me sitting there trying to type it all out, bang it out from scratch. I could put my ideas, and away we go. So I personally use it quite a bit. We have some partners. It's actually interesting. We have a couple partners that we work with to expand our product offering. We have one company that we work with that is into leveraging artificial intelligence to scan in real time CCTV feeds for violence, as an example. So obviously in prison there's lots of cameras. Um, this tool sits on top of the CCTV infrastructure, and because if you've ever been, well, you probably haven't been into a prison operation center, but it's got a whole bunch of television screens with camera feeds, and you have one or two officers in there looking at these camera feeds. You might not see that punch that gets thrown, and or worse, and this instantaneously brings it up in front of the operator. They can then signal to their colleagues to action it, and so that that it's making corrections less reactive and more proactive. And then we've got another company that we're working with in the offender management space that's got built-in artificial intelligence for risk assessment, for bed placement. So that's not exactly in the customer acquisition aspect, but we're certainly recognizing the value of artificial intelligence and bringing it into augment our product suite. And then of course on phone calls, all the natural language processing that could have available, because in the prisons, these phone calls are often monitored or recorded and things of that nature. That's a whole lot of things to be looking for intelligence and things of that nature. So natural language processing certainly can be a valuable tool to jurisdictions to gather intelligence and understanding of what might be transpiring in their respective jurisdictions. Recognize, of course, that you have to respect the rule of law as it relates to privacy and confidentiality and things of that nature. Some places you can record all the time, other places you need a warrant. So obviously we have to respect that. But these natural language processing tools and artificial intelligence, machine learning to gather intelligence are certainly an excellent resource for our clients.
Yeah, it sounds like you're definitely part of the leading edge of the work that you're doing, the industry that you're in, all the connections and networks that you've built over the time that you've been there seems to be serving the business. And then you're deploying technologies and tools that quite frankly aren't being used as predominantly as a lot of people might think. And so that's really really powerful in serving your mission of being the pioneer in this space. And I think it would be interesting, Simon. What is it that that's kind of on the horizon or coming down the pipeline in terms of new stuff that you guys are working on that kind of gets you excited?
Well, it's interesting. I've just been on a couple panels actually relating to AI in our sector,
Mm-hmm.
and there's so much potential. And you kind of alluded to something a little bit a moment ago that corrections is like a prison's like a little city, and but the difference is the population can't leave. But a lot, we provide education, we provide health, we provide food services, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we are able to import a lot of solutions that are in other sectors into correction. We don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel. But just going back to I think artificial intelligence. I wrote on LinkedIn not long ago that artificial intelligence is probably the greatest opportunity in correction since paper. It was a little bit tongue in cheek, but certainly the internet, certainly desktop computing has helped in evolving correction. But I think AI is probably the biggest thing that can make a difference since we started to document what we do on paper. And it's endless in terms of, in my opinion, the opportunity. Now, can we ignore certain things like bias, transparency, things of that nature? No, we have to have the guardrails in place and do it responsibly. But there's so much potential within the space of corrections to modernize, and I think artificial intelligence would allow us to leapfrog from say an automated process to something much more intelligent. Again, got to put in the guardrails, got to make sure that we think about the change management aspect, the governance, and have the required leadership to do it the right way. But think about inmate grievances. So inmates have a lot of time on their hands. They grieve a lot of different things. Some legitimately, maybe some a bit frivolous. But there's a lot, and a lot of the time is on paper. So yes, we could automate that, but you still have to make all the decisions. So one of the things that we've been starting to look at recently is how do we create an electronic grievance approach, which isn't that. I mean that part's easy. We have that. But how do you augment that with decision support for officers? So, I often use the analogy when if I go to see my doctor, he or she can think about, maybe the last 30 cases or last 40 cases with a set of symptoms that I might be bringing or showing. But you plug those into artificial intelligence, and they have a limitless number of cases to do comparison. And I think the grievance process is the same thing, where we can start to use natural language processing, looking for trends and patterns in not just the grievance themselves, but also the decisions. And again, I'm not suggesting that AI should be making decisions, but I certainly think it could provide an officer reviewing these grievances with a lot of background information instantaneously to help inform quicker decisions. I'll give you an example. So a lot of times we'll get food grievances, and sometimes, Johnny's apple will be smaller than Billy's apple, and they'll grieve that. And so if this grievance is a 98% match of the last 100 apple grievances, and they've all been denied, that might be useful information for a correctional officer making a decision to have all of that at their fingertips, because they're probably not going to remember the last 100 grievances on apples. It's just a silly example, but the point being is that they'd be able to expedite their decision making, saying, there's nothing unusual about this grievance. It's aligned to the previous grievances, the previous jurisprudence, if I could put it that way. And I'm going to deny this grievance on these grounds. Again, the AI isn't making the decision. The officer is making the decision with the support of having all of this material available to them to make more consistent and timely decisions.
It's funny that you mentioned that. That's actually one of the things that we deploy, but with a slight twist to it. So one of the tools that we use is kind of part of our conversations when we're having those conversations with people, and it will in real time interpret the information and compare it to let's say, a checklist of things that we hope to cover in a particular conversation. So if there was, certain things that I want to ask my podcast guests, for example, I have a list of those things, and then this will watch in real time, figure out what's happening, and then give me suggestions to what to do with that. And so it's like this third party tool, or like third party entity, that is like analyzing all of this stuff in real time very quickly, and then creating this opportunity for me as the human interface to make the decisions on what should happen next, or whatever else. And so I love that that's kind of where your mind is at in terms of like looking in the future. Like, how could we leverage this what's really good about AI to make what we do better? Because that's, at the end of the day, it's like, this is the difference between dragging a big plow behind an oxen versus driving, the combine through the field. It's a much easier thing. We're still accomplishing the same outcome, and it still does need some human intervention to make it happen. But much to your point here, is it's giving the people the tools to make better decisions, to empower them to do that, and so that's definitely something worth looking forward to. Simon, you've been very generous with your time here on the program, and I'm very grateful for that, and the insights that you shared with us. To wrap things up, I wonder if there was a piece of advice that you could offer other people who are kind of in this similar space, or in the process of making decisions in terms of how to develop their customer acquisition system and how these new tools fit into it. What would that piece of advice be, Simon?
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple, and anytime we look at making improvements, I think we need to understand the business opportunity or the business problem that we're trying to solve. I think a lot of times we focus on the solution and we focus on the technology, and frankly, it's not really about that. It's about what it is that you're trying to solve for. I often use the analogy, I want, and it's kind of like a wants versus needs conversation. I want a new car to get to work. What I really need is a pair of shoes because I can walk there. And I really think that we need to focus on what it is that we're trying to solve, and then figure out how to do it. And when if we can think about the business opportunity in those terms, then we can find the right solutions and the right tools to assist us. Because in some instances, it may not even need technology. I mean, it may be just a process reengineering effort. But a lot of times, I think we get hung up on the new shiny thing, which, listen, I'm predisposed to that too. I like technology. I like being able to have the latest and greatest tools available to me. But I really think we don't spend enough time up front understanding what it is that we're trying to resolve. Take the time up front to understand the opportunity, evaluate, understand the risk, and then look to solution. And I think if we do that, then you're always gonna be well situated, because you're solving problems. You're not solving for symptoms.
I love that. Looking at dissecting the problem in more depth to make sure that we do have the understanding we need to make a more informed decision. I'm a data geek, so I love that was where you pointed at all of this. Simon, if somebody wanted to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just going to add too, that's part of it, is that, a lot of times when we make progress or engage in evolution, and, we don't think about the change. And I think if we start to focus on that problem statement at the outset, and you involve all of your stakeholders, all of your community, and get them involved, that also will help you down the road when you go to implement, because they feel part of the process, right? So there's more than just identifying the problem. It's like, it's an opportunity to bring in your community, your stakeholders, your ecosystem, and get them engaged early. And then not only we're not doing a change, they understand why we're changing, not that we are changing, so that they're part of that why.
Why is such an important part of this too. I'm a huge subscriber to even Simon Sinek's version of drilling down into the why, figuring out why we're here. And so I love that that's a cornerstone in the work you're doing. Simon, if somebody wanted to pick your brain further, or perhaps work with you, how would one go about reaching out to you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. It's funny, I'm not a big social media person, but I seem to spend a bit of time on LinkedIn, so I can be found there. And also, just feel free to reach out to me at simon.bonk tel.io, and that's my email. And again, that's simon.bonk at tel.io. And I would love to anybody that's interested in engaging in this conversation. It's a bit of a passion of mine, so I'd welcome it.
Wonderful. We'll make sure to link to all that in the show notes. And for anybody that's listening and watching and wants to get in touch with me and my team for any reason, it's nextgengrowth.com. Otherwise, that's it for this episode, and I will see you in the next.